There is something nobody tells you about finishing chemotherapy. Things don't always end well, and you don't always receive support from the people you most expect it from. I was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, my bag in my lap and a paper wristband on my wrist, the kind they put on you so they know who you are in case you pass out in the hallway. And I thought, it's over, I survived, but I felt nothing that resembled victory. My name is Grace, and I was 64 years old that day, with hair that hadn't fully grown back, skin a shade that only people who've been through it would recognize, and a husband I had spent 37 years married to waiting in the lobby downstairs. When I came down in the elevator, he was standing near the exit. He didn't come to meet me. He didn't smile. He just stood there with his hands shoved in his pockets, staring at the floor. I have known that man since I was 24 years old. I learned every expression on his face the way you learn the road home, without having to think, without having to look. And in that moment, I knew, before a single word was spoken, that something had happened, that something was wrong. He waited until we got to the car. He waited for me to put on my seatbelt. Then he said he needed to tell me something. He said he had done a lot of thinking over those months, that he had come to a conclusion, that he couldn't take it anymore, that he wanted a divorce. I sat looking out the car window at some random tree on the hospital sidewalk, a small tree tied to a wooden stake to keep it from falling over in the wind. And I thought there was something ironic about that. A tree needing support to stay upright right in front of a place where people go so they don't die. I asked him why. He said he couldn't stand watching me be sick, that the last few months had been too heavy, that he had lost his footing, that he needed a life that wasn't like this, uncertain, full of doctors and tests and waiting. And as he talked, I tried to piece that explanation together in my mind, like a puzzle that wouldn't come together, because the pieces were all there, but the final picture made no sense. 37 years, 6 children, 8 grandchildren, an entire life built together, through struggle, through a love I never doubted until that very second. I told him I was free of the disease, that the worst of it was behind us, and still he insisted he was exhausted and that his mind was made up. I rode home in silence. He didn't say anything more either. We ate dinner separately. I slept in the back bedroom, on the old mattress we kept for when the grandchildren came to stay on weekends. I lay there with my eyes open for hours, trying to figure out exactly where this story had begun to unravel. After that day, the house became a strange territory. We moved through the same rooms without touching, without speaking beyond what was necessary, like 2 guests sharing a space neither of them had chosen. My oldest daughter, Claire, sensed that something was wrong on her very first visit. I didn't tell her. I said I was tired, that recovery was slow, that I needed time. She believed me because she wanted to believe me, because no child wants to watch their parents' marriage fall apart after decades together, especially not when their mother has just finished cancer treatment. I tried to talk to him more than once. I tried to understand if there was something I could do, if it was something I had said or something I had failed to say. He kept repeating the same things, that he was worn out, that he had lost himself over those months, that he needed to find his own path. The words were reasonable. The logic was reasonable. But there was a coldness to him that didn't belong to someone who was simply exhausted. It belonged to someone who had made a decision far longer ago than he was letting on. It was my granddaughter who, without meaning to, made me suspicious. She was 15, Lisa, always on her phone the way kids that age are. She was in my kitchen one afternoon, waiting for her mother to pick her up, and she left her phone on the table when she went to the bathroom. I wasn't going to look. I've never been the type to go through other people's things. But the screen lit up with a notification. The phone wasn't locked. My granddaughter was exchanging messages with her grandfather, my husband, and the message, visible before the screen went dark again, was brief and simple. Are you going to tell her, or should I? I heard Lisa coming back from the bathroom. She picked up her phone without seeming to notice anything, or pretended not to. So I asked her what she or her grandfather was supposed to tell me, what they had been talking about in that message. She said she didn't know how to tell me what she had found out about her grandfather and that I would need to be strong, something I had been my whole life. Even so, I pressed her to tell me right away. She told me that one day she had gotten home from school early and was waiting for her mother in my kitchen, as usual. My husband was making coffee, and when he finished and turned to leave, he dropped an envelope, scattering several papers across the floor. She quickly went to help him pick them up, and, without meaning to, read what was written on some of them. At first, she pretended she hadn't seen anything. But later, after he left to pick me up from the hospital, she went into his home office and searched every corner for that same envelope. When she found it, she took photos of it with her phone to read carefully later. My granddaughter handed me copies of several pages, and what I found was not evidence of the kind of betrayal I had feared. It wasn't another woman. It was something different, something far worse. My husband had opened a bank account I knew absolutely nothing about. Over the past 2 years, while I was receiving my diagnosis, while I was undergoing treatment, while I was losing my hair and my weight and sometimes my will to get out of bed in the morning, he had been carefully and methodically stealing from me, transferring money into that account, our life savings. The money from the apartment we had sold when our children grew up, the inheritance my mother had left me, a portion of my retirement income, all of it done with great care, small amounts spread out over time so as not to raise suspicion, the kind of planning that requires a coldness that knocked the breath out of me when I understood what I was looking at. He had waited for me to get sick to start. He had waited for the diagnosis, watched the scope of the treatment, and he had concluded that I would not survive, that divorce would be unnecessary, that all he had to do was wait. But I survived. And now the plan had changed, because the money was already gone, and I was alive, and he needed another way out. Divorce was the way out. I would need a lawyer, energy, the will to fight. Things a woman who had just finished chemotherapy could hardly be expected to have. There were no tears that could express the pain I was feeling. There was a kind of estrangement, like when you stare at a familiar word for so long that it loses all meaning, and the letters become nothing but shapes with no significance. 37 years. I had looked at that man every single day for 37 years and had not seen this. Or perhaps I had seen it and had chosen not to name it. My granddaughter held me and apologized for not telling me sooner. I didn't blame her. She had done nothing wrong. She had been carrying that alone at 15 years old because she didn't know how to tell me without breaking me. I kept those copies. It took me 3 days to decide what to do. 3 days during which I kept cooking, kept sleeping in the back bedroom, kept being the woman who had beaten cancer, and still didn't know a thing. 3 days to let the anger settle. Because I didn't want to act out of emotion. I wanted to act out of the certainty that I could not afford to regret my choices. I called a lawyer a friend of mine had used in her own divorce years earlier. I went to his office on a Tuesday morning without telling anyone. I brought all the evidence my granddaughter had given me. The lawyer spent over an hour reading through the documents, and when he looked up at me, he said a crime had been committed. He said the evidence was solid. I won't go into detail about what came next, because some things belong to silence until they are fully resolved. What I can say is that my daughter Claire cried for 2 straight hours when I told her. My other children were outraged by their father's actions. My ex-husband left my house with 2 suitcases and an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger? Relief? Shame? Perhaps all 3, mixed together into something that has no name. I was on the porch when he walked out. I didn't say a word, neither did he, and he was gone. People ask me if I hate him. It's an honest question, and I try to answer it honestly. What I feel is not hate. Hate requires an energy I would rather spend on other things. What I feel is an emptiness shaped exactly like everything I believed I had and didn't. It's different. It's quieter than hate, and with time it shrinks, not because I forget, but because other things fill in the spaces around it. I turned 65 a few months later, at a table with my 6 children, my 8 grandchildren, and a chocolate cake with strawberries that my youngest granddaughter had made. I looked around that table, at those faces that are made of me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Cancer tried to take me. It didn't succeed. The man I shared my life with tried, in his own way, to leave me with nothing before I could fight back. He didn't succeed either, and I am still here, with my hair grown back again, my body slower than before, but working, and my life taking on a shape I am still learning to recognize. It's not the ending I would have written for myself, but I have my family, and that is what truly matters.